Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second in our series of astrology demos. This is such an honor and a blessing to be able to work with people on a regular basis to show astrology, and we're just rolling right along in the series, and we have another wonderful chart and another wonderful guest to show you kind of how astrology works. So take a seat and we'll get started with the reading. Okay, so while I'm pulling up your chart, my dear, have you had an astrology session before?
I have, actually.
Excellent. And did you enjoy it? Did you find it insightful? What was your experience with that astrology session?
I enjoyed it very much, and I found it very insightful.
Awesome, awesome. And come on, technology. There we go. Okay. Ooh, wasn't pulling up for a second. Alrighty. So, any questions, comments, concerns before we get started about the chart? Things that you'd like to dive into right away, or aspects of the life that you'd like to discuss before we hit some of the basics?
Probably my struggle areas have always been through most of my life in relationship areas, and in money.
Gotcha. Really interesting from a monetary perspective, because the moon is in your house of finance. So a lot of the monetary struggles tend to be associated with your emotional mood swings, and the idea of the heart space being both a barometer, kind of a cause and effect of the monetary situation. But I think we'll get into that because you actually have a really strong aspect between Venus ruling your moon, and the moon making a trine to your midheaven. So there's lots of good discussion that we'll kind of get into there. But the wires that connect them need to be kind of unpacked a little bit first. As far as the relationships go, we do see Saturn in Pisces in the 7th house. Saturn is notoriously a difficult planet. Wherever Saturn is placed, it tends to be a place in the chart that is slow to grow, is a good way to say it. But also with every Saturn return, we get better and better at that experience. And although Saturn will be migrating through Aquarius at the time of this recording, a couple years down the road when Saturn moves into Pisces and you start to undergo that second Saturn return, there's going to be a lot more reawakening of those patterns and understanding how to refine and strengthen your relationships as Saturn moves to conjoin that. But also as all of the activity happens in the beginning of the year, as everything moves into Pisces, as Jupiter and Venus and the sun and the moon all move into Pisces, and kind of light up that relationship house. I think the first part of the year, next year, especially in 2022, is going to be a very relationship heavy kind of quarter for that first part of the year. So good that we're kind of discussing it now.
Well, hopefully it's good.
Well, and in astrology, no transit is really good or bad. There are definitely levels of intensity, and certain aspects create more friction. But with so many planets piling up in Pisces over the next couple months, it's just going to be extra stimulation to that house, and how you approach it and how you understand it is really dependent on your relationship to those energies and whether or not you can learn, grow, adjust, and process through them.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting about the 7th house, whenever we look at relationships in general, the sign that's on the 7th house cusp is often the type of person that we are naturally attracted to. So having Pisces on that cusp, naturally attracted to people who are emotionally oriented, who are spiritually oriented, who have a good amount of kind of psychism or empathy. They're able to kind of not just understand their own world, but delve into the realities of others pretty easily. And also people who are just in touch with the subtle overall. When we look at Pisces on the 7th house, there's often the attraction of partners with boundary issues more often than not. And that being an issue as you, especially with your Virgo ascendant and your Taurus sun, just that double earth kind of comes in with all boundaries, all predefined definitions all of the time. Even that Libra moon just doesn't let it go. Having a partner with Pisces qualities or looking for that ideal Pisces partner may prove to be quite the antithesis to how you're used to operating.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on either the current relationship that you're in or relationships in general in regards to what I've just kind of mentioned?
So I think part of what you talked about in there, most of my partners tend to have addictions,
Pisces is
like
one of those signs.
alcohol.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately. All the water
Yeah.
signs are prone to addiction,
Mm-hmm.
mostly due to alcohol and escapism. But the thing about water signs in general is that if they do not harness their emotional intelligence, and if they do not process their latent psychic abilities, it can really overwhelm them.
Yeah.
Learning to swim is not easy, even for fishes. And that's kind of the idea with Pisces as well. It can be a slippery slope when you have to navigate not just the physical world, but the etheric world on top of it, and everybody's internal world around you. It can definitely set up a lot of that hardship for sure.
Yeah. And I think what kicks in for me too is the Taurus nature of the, I'm going to fix you, I'm going to help you, I'm going to change you,
Yeah, it's so tough and so tricky. And why don't you just quit?
Well,
because you have the willpower to do that. Especially with Mars in your first house, like the minute you put your foot down, like it's done. But not everybody operates like that.
It takes me a while to put the foot down though.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
But once I'm done, I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an interesting conversation to kind of circle around back to, because there are other aspects of the chart that I think will fit into that experience nicely. So let's move into some of the basic placements, and then we'll come back to and weave in that other aspect of the relationship and that whole kind of dilemma. So first and foremost, let's look at this Sun-Venus combination in Taurus in the 9th house, starting with the basics of the sun sign. Pretty much everybody knows their sun sign, but very few people know the ruling planet of their sun, which kind of gives the sun its oomph, its power, and really helps us to understand the placement of our ego. You have probably one of the nicer arrangements of sun placements, not only a sun in Taurus, which is stable, sturdy, steadfast, grounded, rigid at times, stubborn at times.
I don't like change.
Yep, fixated. It is fixed earth. It is the earth of earth, Taurus, which can be great to build a house on. Some of my most reliable friends are Taurus. It's just, they have an appreciation for things that very few people possess, but that comes at a cost. Now, your sun is also ruled by Venus, the ruler of Taurus, who is in Taurus in the 9th house, which is just chef's kiss, absolutely glorious. We love the goddess of love being in a good spot in the chart, but not only that, the ruler of your sun really gives a healthy ego to the chart, a healthy sense of I amness to the chart, and really grounds the persona. And where does it ground the persona but in the 9th house of spirituality, travel, foreigners, and higher education? It is the house of worldliness. And to have a house that is so expansive with such grounded earth energy, it's kind of like you have the world at your fingertips. It's just such a lovely combination of placements to ground that normally expansive and overwhelming house.
Well, it's funny too, we talked about relationships before that. Many a time when I'm in a relationship with someone, they say to me that I make them feel grounded.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not just that, but your Virgo ascendant, when in astrology, we often look at how the elements are stacked, and you have a good balance in your chart, but we need to give weight to certain planets and certain placements. For you, having the sun, Venus, who's ruling the sun, and the ascendant plus Mars in an earth sign, really does weigh down the chart very heavily, making you the anchor for a lot of people, which is exactly what somebody who's going through a lot of addiction issues or a lot of personal crisis or chaos kind of
Yep.
needs is that rock. So partners constantly telling you, you're my rock is somewhat a term of endearment, but can also be kind of toxic and cringy as well, depending on the situation.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, having so much groundedness in the chart really does give you a foothold of that element. And leveraging that can be a really fun experiment through the life. But how you grow this go around and your life purpose is a little bit different than that.
Okay.
So one of the things before we get into some life purpose stuff and some of the other aspects of the chart, let's circle back to this moon, because we have the sun in Taurus and Venus in Taurus up in the 9th house of spirituality, higher education, travel, and foreigners. But then we also have Venus, who's ruling your moon in Libra in the 2nd. So when it comes to financial aspects, how you earn money and how you spend money is also going to be linked to the 9th house. And this opens up a really cool line of questioning. When we have the ruler of the 2nd in the 9th, there's often the overspending of money on things like travel, on things like higher education, getting into a lot of student debt, and things that tend to drain money from a worldly perspective. I actually had one of my clients have this combination in their chart, and they had some hard planets, retrograde and eclipsed planets that were in that combination, and they had actually been scammed by people in foreign nations.
That's awful.
And I thought that was a really interesting play of the world, the
my catfish
aspect.
10 is out. I haven't gotten scammed.
Yeah, for sure. And your placements are very strong, which is why, circling back to that idea of the 2nd house of finance, it does make me wonder what your relationship to money is, and why, when Venus, the goddess of love, in her home sign is ruling your moon and the 2nd house from such an auspicious place, why the money isn't flowing. So talk to me about that.
I don't know. I always seem to get just enough.
Just enough.
Yeah.
One of the just enough, right? So there are a couple ways that we can slice the money conversation. When clients come to see me for an astrology consult and we start to talk business, we start to talk work, we start to talk money, astrology divides the work conversation and what we get from our work into several different aspects of the chart. We have the 10th house of success. We have the 8th house of entrepreneurship. We have the 6th house of work. And then we have the 2nd house of money. So astrology really says how you make your money in life is not necessarily what you do for a living. And what you do for a living may not be what you are called to do from a kind of entrepreneurial spirit perspective. And also what you become famous for may not be connected to any of those.
Okay.
So one of the things that I want to kind of let people know who may be watching this recording, but also for you as well to understand, is that when the 2nd house is ruled by such an auspicious placement in the 9th, it's really important that you understand your financial income will be greatly heightened if you take a position or a frame of working that is internationally focused, deals with foreign relations, travel, or is in the higher education sector.
That's interesting.
Yep. I have clients that are like, I don't know, like I've worked at the same company for years and I'm not making enough. They're not promoting me. I can't get by. It just seems like I have less and less.
There's your sign, right?
Right. And so it's one of those things where sometimes in the chart, we have to leverage the natal placements and pivot into a branch of work that allows the money to flow more readily.
Okay. I actually always worked in group homes for folks with developmental disabilities for like 35 years. So I've always done something where I'm like a caregiver. And now recently I am a secretary in a high school. I've moved away from that. So either one, they're kind of still along the same route. It's rewarding in like a feeling way, but in a money way, it's not.
Right. And this is what the issue tends to be when the moon is in the second house, is emotions tend to mix with money. And that can be really tricky, because in your conversation, you're doing a quote unquote good job because you're earning money associated with that heartfelt sense of satisfaction.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily how astrology would phrase the success of that placement. The success of that placement would be you actually getting emotional satisfaction from the money that you earn, not the kind of
not how you're earning it.
Right, exactly. So the paycheck is more emotionally important than the work itself, and more emotionally stabilizing than the work itself. Plus, high school isn't technically higher education just because it has high in it. We're specifically looking at college level and post-secondary. So even the idea of you working for a community college or you working for educational programs that are not going to be in the what we would still consider high school to be a primary school type level.
Okay.
Yeah. But also the idea of, if you wanted to also experiment with, if you're into travel and you're into that area of life or spiritual development, finding aspects of that work that can also be financially fulfilling as side projects, so that you can keep the day job, maybe keep the benefits associated with that, have the foundation associated with that particular aspect, but you have these other avenues that are more ninth house oriented, more expansive, that open up your financial house a little bit better to kind of stuff your pockets as well.
So that certainly makes sense. I am one of Priscilla's students.
Okay.
So I do cards, I do readings. So that would kind of make sense with the spiritual part. Like opening that more.
For sure. Yeah. And do you find that that brings in a little bit of added income, or do you feel like the finances are blocked there as well?
No, it does here and there. You know, I've only been doing it for money wise for a couple of, not real long compared to some people. But it does bring in some extra money. Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah. Maybe leaning on that just a little bit more. Also, if you wanted to take a spiritual approach to remediating the financial equation, we would definitely want to set up a Venus altar. Venus, who is the ruler of your sun, but also of your second house, putting up an altar to her, making offerings to her on Fridays, her day of the week, and asking for her literal abundance to kind of grace and bless your prosperous actions, and kind of letting her drive the financial conversation.
All right, I will try that. I'm actually moving next month, so when I move, I can do that.
Lovely, lovely. Yeah, moving while everything starts to migrate into Sagittarius. Sun just went into the 4th house of Sagittarius for you. Mercury is about to go into the 4th house of Sagittarius for you. So lots of interesting discussion with that as well moving forward.
Next, I'm actually moving next month on the 15th, December 15th.
Yeah, that'll be right. Let's see, December 15th. Let's see something real quick, because if that's right as the sun conjoins your south node, that would actually be a really cool thing to to share with the class. Now it's a couple days before, the week before. When we look at astrology and transit specifically, we often want to make sure that they're matching, like, to the degree. And what's interesting about that is the sun moves into Sagittarius at 13 degrees on December 5th. So just a few days before. Oh, but does Mars swing around on the 15th? It swings in on the 13th. And this is what I think is really fascinating about particular days and times. And then on the 15th exactly is when Mars conjoins the south node, the point of purging, on the 15th. Yeah. So astrologically, that makes a little bit of sense with that particular blend. And I like that. I like seeing those transits kind of work out in the real world. Anyway, we're getting off. Okay. So with the financial discussion, kind of having looked at that a little bit, let's talk about core personality traits with the ascendant and all of this Virgo activity. Our first client chart that we're going to be debuting in the series is also a Virgo ascendant chart.
Really?
So there are similarities, but core differences as well.
Okay.
So one of the cool things about your Virgo ascendant, in addition to kind of doubling down on the earth energy and making you a good manager, a good taskmaster, somebody who loves the to-do list, also, your ascendant at 21 degrees is making an exact trine to your sun in Taurus up in the 9th. So again, the idea of you really leveraging your Virgo skills in a scholastic environment is one of the things that helps you to succeed. But also, like, it would really help with the scheduling of various readings. It would really help with not just the readings itself, but like your specificity and your need for evidence-based kind of points within the reading itself. Like if clients were to consult with you, it's not just, well, I kind of see this energy coming down the pipeline, like that grates on you. Like
I don't like that.
Yeah, exactly. We want specific, we want dates,
Details.
we want times, details. Yep. Virgo is a fan of the details. So that's really, really helpful. But it does also bring forward an interesting aspect of the chart, which mirrors our first chart, but through different planetary placements. The ruler of your chart is Mercury, because Virgo is ascending, and Mercury rules Virgo. And Mercury, the ruler of your chart, is in Aries in the 8th house of entrepreneurship. So this is really interesting because our previous client also had a connection to the 8th house and also was involved in intuitive reading and psychic work. So the 8th house is the house of death, taxes, estates, and entrepreneurship. It's a wide range of things that are pretty black and white, but it does have that kind of haunted feel to it. And so when we see the ruler of the chart in the 8th, it's often somebody who's very much gifted in terms of going out on their own, striking out on that independence, and really making sure that they are able to offer their gifts to the world within the package that they create. But also Mercury, the psychopomp, as ruler of the chart in the 8th, does bring forward those mediumship and kind of psychic relaying skills as well. So good stuff there.
Yeah, that is good stuff. So it sounds like I'm moving in the right direction with this, so that's good.
Yeah, I think so. And I think again, as you kind of talked and we spread out this equation of looking at what you do for a living and the money that's not necessarily coming in how you would like it to. I think the heaviness emotionally that you talk about when you talk about trying to give back in your jobs, but it just keeps clogging up your pipes. You know, it keeps emotionally backlogging you. Whereas in the reading aspect, it really does seem like there's more upliftment, there's more clarity there. And even if you are hesitant, you know, because of the inexperience or, you know, just that earthen, slow and steady wins the race type of approach to the situation, it's still an easier place for you to navigate astrologically.
That makes sense.
Yeah. A really interesting part of your chart with your chart ruler, in fact, is that Mercury is in Aries and Mars is in Virgo. This is what's known as a mutual reception, because Mars is the ruler of the sign Aries and Mercury is the ruler of the sign Virgo. They're essentially staying at each other's Airbnb. And because of that, they have an added strength and an added relationship. So this is one of the markers that we look for in a chart that entrepreneurship and business specifically is heightened drastically. And if you wanted to kind of leverage your skills of marketing and kind of getting the word out and really going a little bit heavier on the business side, I think that the stars would align in your favor.
Okay.
Yeah, they back you up.
Okay. And that's where I kind of fall off a little bit because I work full time and stuff too. So it's like, it's hard to get, put all that energy in. So I don't market myself very well.
Right. And I think the tricky part is the moon. It really does seem to be the linchpin of this whole chart for you.
That dang moon.
That dang moon, because you're investing your emotion in all the wrong places, right? Where you are,
I would agree, yes.
Yeah, where you're not getting a return on your emotional investment. And that's probably the first thing that needs to kind of be cut off or remeasured.
Okay.
Is how much of yourself are you really putting into a job that doesn't pay you enough? And that being the first emotional boundary that you draw so that you can invest some of that emotion later in the readings that you do, in the things that pay you better. And not only that, but also are a greater emotional return on investment for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm sure you in your work, you find this too, is I find every person's reading is helpful to me as well. I learn from them as well.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And, it's as somebody who's also been in the bodywork industry for a really long time, which is different, but in the same vein of that caregiving. It's very different when you have to give care to somebody who has no hope of recovering versus somebody who can still make a change in their life, somebody who can still take action, somebody who is not at the whims of a hormonal body.
Yes.
And that when we're dealing with like the chaos of teenage life and then the kind of end of life transition care, those are two extremes of the situation, and we maybe would find more emotional oomph and motivation to do the work if you were working with people who could actually take your advice and implement it instead of just your earthen wisdom kind of falling on deaf ears.
Well, yeah, because they don't have the ability to know what to do with it,
Right.
Well, my prior work.
Yeah.
And I also teach music on the side too. I got all these little side gigs.
This is the entrepreneurial spirit that we talk about in the chart. So that's fine. Yeah. Okay. Where else would you like to go in the chart? Any questions that you have so far, or things that you'd like to discuss?
You've pretty much cleared up a lot. I know I have it in my chart. I'm just not sure where it is. And I know lots of times when it's in somebody's chart, it has a big impact. That Chiron there. Is that Chiron in my chart?
Chiron. So
Chiron.
I personally don't use the asteroids.
Okay.
And there's a very particular reason why. I grew up studying the asteroids as a good modern astrologer would. But what I find is the personal planets tend to have a greater hold over the life. And we can totally nitpick and look at various asteroidal influences if you want to split hairs. But I use this analogy with my clients is if you're in a room with an elephant and a mouse, the thing you need to focus on is the elephant. And the personal planets are kind of like the elephants in the chart. And the mouse is fun and cute and can maybe show you a way out through a crack or a crevice, but it's still the smaller of the influences. Unless you're
I definitely hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like I said, money and relationships were my two biggest struggle areas. Communication, it kind of cracks me up with the Mercury thing, because communication, I'm not real good at. Like sometimes I'm not really good at it. Like I don't like talking in front of people unless I really, really, study it. Sometimes having conversations with people I'm not good at. You know what I'm saying? When things have to be discussed. Sometimes I struggle in that area as well.
What's really interesting is our first client example said the exact same thing.
Oh, no way.
What's different about your two charts is that they had an excuse. Their
I
Mercury,
don't.
Their Mercury was retrograde and combust the sun.
That makes sense.
The ruler of your chart being Mercury and Aries in the 8th, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong or give me some feedback on this, but I think the reason why you feel like you have trouble communicating is because you know what you want to say. You just won't allow yourself to say it.
I would totally agree with you on that.
So it's very different than I'm a bad communicator. It's I bite my tongue too much.
Okay. Yep, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. And
like
again,
if it's in like a relationship thing, sometimes I'm afraid, they're going to leave or they won't listen to what I've got to say,
Here's maybe something to consider is, and even in your work, right? The secretary is a communicative job, but you're relaying other people's messages.
Exactly.
In caregiving, you're supposed to do the work, be seen and not heard, and that's also suppressing to the voice. Your chart needs to roar. Your chart needs to let those words fly. It's the Mars and Mercury reception. It's quick, it's thoughtful, it's precise. It may hurt, it may cut, but it is the truth. And I think maybe because you've suppressed that for so long and you've tempered that to within an inch of its life, I think maybe your chart is more about reclaiming your voice.
Okay. That would definitely make sense. Yeah. That would definitely make sense because I definitely have I do struggle in that area. Like you said, I know what I want to say. I know, like, I'm a type of person, there is no gray area. It's either black or white.
Right.
I don't know if something like that shows up in your chart, but that's just the way I am. It's either black or it's white. Yep. There is no in between.
For me, the 8th house, another name for the 8th house is the house of contracts. And it is very black and white. It is, sign on the dotted line.
Yeah.
Either you're dead or you're alive. Either you're in business or you're out of business. The sign is open or closed. It is very much either you
like me or you don't,
Right. It is a house of kind of extremes. And it's good for things like business, but it does get really tricky when feelings get involved, or when you try to, especially with the moon not necessarily being in a strong opposition, but in a sign-based opposition to that Mercury, when your emotions say, oh no, we shouldn't. And that Libra moon starts to waffle and weigh the pros and cons of the situation and can hijack that true voice.
That Libra moon hijacks a lot.
Yeah, it does.
It absolutely hijacks a lot.
Libra moon is tricky. Libra moon is so tricky. But again, you've got that Venus ruler of the moon and the sun, which I think is just absolutely in your favor. So I would really look at Venus remediation, understanding that one of the deepest forms of love is to be authentic to yourself and authentic to others, and to not kind of break yourself into little pieces, like let them choke.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that makes sense because I take a lot on for other people. I'm very empathic too, so I take on a lot of people's energy anyhow. And then when it's in a relationship wise, I definitely take on their stuff.
Yeah. And I respect that, and I definitely understand where you're coming from with that.
But then you leave nothing for yourself.
Right. And a lot of your earthen placements, they are about boundaries. So I think, again, caring a little bit less about what the people are doing around you and building your own sandcastle, You know, you've spent so much of your life tending to the needs of others. It's time to reclaim some of that, some of your own sturdiness. Like, stop bending over backwards. It's hurting your back.
I was just gonna, it's funny you just said that, because I was gonna ask you about the health area.
Yeah. So it is really interesting when we look at Virgo rising charts in general. There are 3 houses that indicate progression of symptomology and physical constitution. So having a Virgo ascendant means that your most sensitive body system, and the body system that we need to nurture the most, is the small intestine and the liver, our center of absorption and processing and filtration. So really working on diet as a major remediation point for you, making sure that meals are consistent, that they are high quality nutrient content, and that they are easily absorbable. As an example, one of the best things that a Virgo rising can do for their health and wellness is get a meal prep service, or get into meal prepping, so that they're having the same meals every single day at the same time. The body can expect the nutrients, produce the right amount of acids, break it down appropriately, and there is a routine and a rhythm, which all earth signs love.
So here's the funny part you say about that, because I recently went to a nutritionist and a trainer, and she sent me weekly meal plans, and I was doing good and sticking to them. And then kind of stuff went a little wacky, and I went off of it. And I wasn't sure where they were coming from, but this was one of my questions. And then all of a sudden I started breaking out in these hives, and I had no idea where they came from.
Ooh,
and
okay.
They would show up in one spot.
Yes.
And then disappear the next day and be in another spot. And they were itchy as all go.
Yep. Okay. So here's what's going to blow your mind. So in astrology, we say that the first house is the house of the body, and it contains the most sensitive body system that needs to be kind of fed and nourished, because it's the sign that's prone to breaking down first. So that's going to be the gut, and nourishing that with predictable meals, yada, yada, everything that we've said. If you ignore that, then we move into the 6th house of symptomology. And the 6th house of symptomology, the sign on that is Aquarius, which rules the skin, the calves, and the peripheral nerves. And so if the gut is neglected, then symptoms will shift into the skin. And then if you really neglect the body, if you completely ignore everything that's happening in the skin with the restless legs, with the peripheral numbness and all that Aquarius stuff, then we move into the 12th house of hospitalization, which is what knocks you flat on your butt and sends you potentially to an emergency medical situation, which is going to deal with the heart and the spine and the eyes of Leo.
So my hives, it's going on almost 3 months. I think they finally found something that might work, because I haven't had any all weekend. So that's good. And you say goes into the heart. I had a heart attack last year.
There we go. So I think the whole remediating the chart from a health perspective, I think starts with the meal planning and getting back on that routine. I can't stress this enough. Like, Virgo craves expectability. And we need things that are safe, but also, like, it doesn't need to be super bland food. Like, it can be super delicious. It has to be the same, so that the body knows how much calories are being ingested, when it is being ingested, when is the fuel coming, so that I can expend my energy appropriately, and making sure that the worst thing that what Virgo hates the most is unpredictability. So skipping meals, having a large meal one day and nothing the next day, like swinging through those extremes. That's when the body really starts to get in trouble. And we see IBS, we see a lot of the small intestine, the blood sugar intolerances from the liver start to come up through the Virgo being mistreated.
So she basically wrote me meal plans once a week, where basically either have option A or you have option B. There wasn't 50 million different choices. You either pick from one side or you pick from the other side, and that's what you had for the week. And you could have, she would give you an extra 500 calories that you could have each week.
Nothing crazy.
And the way you're talking, I actually felt, and there were, it was good food. It wasn't anything that, and now that you're talking about that, I definitely felt a lot better. And then I went off of it, and it kind of seems when I went off, that's when the hives and stuff kind of started.
Yeah. And it could be that your body was finally getting what it wanted.
Yeah.
And so then you stopped and the body's like, no, we were so close, you know?
And it's funny because like as they were breaking, I'm breaking out more and more. You were writing all those little things about Aquarius and the skin, right. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. And that's one way that we can use astrology is through a medical lens. You know, all of this is great metaphysical conversations and great about other aspects of the life, but it also applies to the body too.
No, absolutely. And I've always heard the phrase, your health, and I don't know how true this is, but it's all in your gut.
Again, we would really base that on the different signs, because we have Cancer, which rules the stomach, so upper digestive, Scorpio, which rules the colon, the large intestine, and then we have Virgo, which rules the small intestine. And so each sign rules a different aspect of the body.
Yeah.
And we really
and Taurus is the throat. So right. I got that one.
Throat,
yeah.
But also thyroid and metabolism. You know, so we have lots of different aspects, but because the first house has Virgo in it, that's how we base the medical transits, and really making sure that anytime we look at Virgo, Aquarius, Leo, those are going to be the signs that are health oriented for you. But that's also how we trace our way back through symptomology. And remember that Virgo is the primary sign to nourish, liver and small intestine. If those are doing good, then everything else is just secondary.
Lucky I'm not a heavy drinker then, huh?
Honestly, yeah.
Lucky I'm not.
I have, and interestingly enough, like I think it's also one of the things with addictions in general, with relationships, you know, that can be it can be a really strong mirror for our own habits, our own decisions, and having somebody in our life that is able to draw their own boundaries helps to reinforce our ability to draw our own, you know. But likewise, when we're constantly surrounding ourselves with people that are collapsing under the weight of their own life, it also affects us internally too.
So is there anything that shows in your chart whether you are susceptible to like addictive behavior?
Yes, to a certain extent. But we normally see that with a lot of water signs. We normally see that with different emotional blockages within the chart, which it's not necessarily a predisposition for addiction, but a predisposition for emotional difficulty, which leads to addictive tendencies. So there are several ways that we can slice that conversation. Again, with your sun being ruled by Venus and Taurus in the 9th, that's a pretty strong sense of self. Likewise, the Virgo ascendant making a trine to it from the house of the body, that's pretty self-sustaining, and not necessarily what we would look at from an addiction perspective.
So like I was a smoker for many, many years. That's why I'm kind of asking, is there anything that really shows?
One of the things that I will say about the moon in Libra, which seems to be so central to your chart.
Sure does.
Is that, you know, when we feel emotionally compromised, and specifically because it's in the 2nd house, what will compromise your emotions faster than anything else is money and self-value and feeling worthless is when that moon gets carved out, and when there is absolute